So I'd like to congratulate you who did the debate. It's been very good that you've studied well. Since we came to exile, in the monasteries, especially in the nunneries, where they used to only do tantric rituals in the past, but not study philosophy and debate and logic. So many of them, there were many of these nunneries and monasteries in Tibet who didn't want that. And of course, nunneries didn't really used to have any study of logic and philosophy. So this has been our kind of a custom in Tibet, that the nunneries didn't have any program for debate and logic, study of logic. So for hundreds of years we have lived like that. So do we need to keep this tradition, continue with it or not? You have to check whether that even if it's a tradition or custom, whether it's something which is beneficial or something which is a drawback. You have to think about it. So this, in case of this, it's a drawback. And therefore, after coming to exile, monasteries like Namgyal Monastery and also Gyudu and Gyume Tantric colleges, where they didn't used to have any study of logic, philosophy, and also the nunneries with regard to the bhikshuni ordination, it has to be done according to the Vinaya. So it has to be done according to the Vinaya, and also through the discussion done by the Vinaya holders. But we can definitely do the study of logic and philosophy, and that has been so far very fruitful. That it has been done in the nunneries, and then in the recent years, we have I have asked people to study if they are really interested in Buddhism, its theory and practice. They have to do studies. So Buddhism is talking about cultivating happiness through study and practice, not just through prayers. In our homes, we do arrange altar and do prayers. So this kind of Buddhism, with regard to practice of Buddhism and gaining the experience, it's not just it doesn't come through prayers. So we're talking about purifying our mind of all the negativities, which has to come through study and practice. It doesn't come just through a mere faith. Blind faith is not enough for that, but we have to cultivate faith based on reason. So if you don't see the reason to do Dharma practice, and if you don't really understand it, then your faith would be just blind faith. So the faith in Buddhism has to be generated based on reason. And therefore, I have urged people to study Buddhism, to the Tibetans, as well as people in the Himalayan regions who have the same kind of cultural tradition as Tibet. And even I also asked Chinese who take interest in Buddhism, and people from Korea and Japanese. We have one Japanese here today, and also Vietnamese. So whoever has interest and faith in Buddhism, where Buddhism is their traditional religion, I have been urging them to study Buddhism. Spanish in Spain, the majority religion is, the main religion is that of Catholicism. So the Spanish here is an exception. So that she has taken interest in Buddhism, and particularly has taken interest in studying logic and debate. So with regards to the procedure of debate, we used terms like tell and cheat, and there's like a so with regard to logic, it is something which is common to Buddhism and non-Buddhist. So in general, logic is something common to Buddhists and non-Buddhists, just as we have other sciences like arts and crafts and so forth. So with regard to this logic, when we study it in connection with Buddhism, we do not. We do study it in connection with Buddhism and not with other subjects. So perhaps if we could innovate system studying logic in connection with other subjects, perhaps we could innovate in the world using this logic in connection with other subjects. This could be something new. So the procedure of debate and study of logic, even if you're not Buddhist, you can study. You should study it. So if we could add this to our subjects, curriculum in schools, perhaps it could be an innovation. So as I have been urging people to study logic and debate, accordingly, from amongst the lay people, you have started a program study. So I've seen some progress in it, which was very good. I congratulate you. So gradually, if we could use it, this system of debate and logic in all kinds of subjects that we study, it would be an example to the world at large. So we have to keep this in mind. It's a goal. So whether we are able to accomplish it or not is a different matter, but it's possible. We have to keep it in mind that it's something possible that we can accomplish. So when we do debate, perhaps we have to, it's a point to consider whether we need really to stand up and stamp our feet and clap our hands when we debate. If the kids, school kids, were to do this in class, perhaps it would be a problem for the students who are a little bit timid in class. So for me, this is the case. Whereas if I sit and do debate by snapping my hands, then it's easier for me. So for the students in schools, if I don't know if they need to stand up and stamp their feet on the ground and clap their hands, whether that's necessary or not, I don't know. But we can have this kind of debate by sitting on a chair. Perhaps one student could give answer, the rest of them class could ask questions without having to stand up. So if in the beginning, of course, it may be better for the classes to do debate by sitting on chair, where one person answers and the rest of the class asks questions. But and as they progress further and further, and they become more adept at debating, then perhaps they could stand up and debate like the traditional way, clapping their hands and stamping their feet on the ground, and so forth. So you have to know the reason. On the one hand, if you have faith in Buddhism, then you have to generate that faith based on reason, understanding the teaching. So on the other hand, it's something which is useful for everyone, whether you're Buddhist or not. For any kind of study that you do, it's very useful tool. So we have collected monks from different monastic institutions to study science. And most of the teachers who teach these monks are volunteers. Most of them Americans. And these teachers are really happy to teach these monks. And the monks do not know English. And also they don't know math. But the teachers have found that these monks have very acute mind for investigation. That's because the reason why they have such an acute mind is because of the debate that they have done for many years. So we have to have a very broad goal to study debate and logic. So that's one thing. And then for the talk today, which I have started a few years ago, we have started this program of introducing Buddhism. It has been very beneficial so far. Why that is so is because as human beings, we have the three poisons of desire, hatred, and ignorance. So the 6 billion people on this earth, if you look at them, we create our own problems, and while we become unhappy through our own creations, we create problems for others because of hatred and so forth. And how many people there are who do such thing, and even amongst the leaders, how many people there are who ruin other people's life as well in the world. So the 6 billion people on earth do not want happiness, but do not want suffering, but happiness. Even though that is the case, the suffering is endless for them, like the ripples of the water. So it has been like this, and it will be like this for the future. If you think about this carefully, these problems do not come from the machines that people have created, but because of wrong ways of handling their mind, being overcome with love and hate. So suffering boils down, the cause of suffering is that of our mind, the undisciplined mind. Because our mind is so overwhelmed by these three poisons, and people lack the introduction to seeing these poisons as something negative. And then, as a result of these poisons, people experience suffering. In all different religions, there's the teaching of love, compassion, tolerance, and so forth, patience. Mainly based on faith on their respective gods, or in Islam they call Allah, in Hinduism they call Brahma, and so forth. But these different traditions do not point to the negative thoughts and emotions, attachment, desire, hatred, and so forth, as the fundamental cause of our problems. So although all these traditions, different religious traditions teach love, compassion, affection, and so forth, they do not point to these negative states of mind as being the cause of suffering. It's only Buddhism, seems, which does that, pointing the negative states of mind as being the causes of suffering. And the root of all these different negative states of mind is identified as ignorance. So dimuk, or ignorance, closed-mindedness, is something which is not unawareness. So this has to be overcome through wisdom, not through faith. So therefore there is so much emphasis in Buddhism on cultivating wisdom, because it is the only factor that goes counter to the ignorance. So we as Buddhists traditionally, so we have a very good opportunity, and therefore we have to recognize it and try to use this opportunity to study Buddhism. We cannot say that Buddhism is very sacred and very great religion, and therefore everybody in the world has to become Buddhist. So this is not going to happen. Religion cannot be forced on people. So people have to voluntarily accept it. The 6 billion people have the right to follow a religion or not, whether they want to be believers or non-believers. They have the right and the freedom. But for us as Buddhists, Tibetans, and as Buddhists, so Buddhism, which identifies the cause of all these problems and faults in the world, and how do the problems arise, whether they have causes or not, down to the fundamental root cause. Buddhism does that. All the shortcomings in our life, problems in our life come from our attachment and anger and so forth, and these are rooted in ignorance. And therefore we can do such analysis. There is such analysis in Buddhism. Although everyone in the world, the 6 billion people, are equal in the sense of not wanting suffering but wanting happiness. So to overcome these negativities in our minds, we have a special opportunity to serve the people in the world. And the other, secondly, it is very important for us as Tibetans to keep up with our religious tradition. In the beginning, when we came to exile, people took pity on us, and in the past, Tibetans Tibetan Buddhism has been looked as Lamaism, and in the Lobsang Ramba has written a book. He said he talked about third eye, and by practicing Tibetan Buddhism, he made such comments. And then Tibetan Buddhism has been called Lamaism because of the external things that people see of Tibetan Buddhism in terms of like jump dance and so forth, where people wear masks. But slowly, after coming into exile, people have found opportunity to study Tibetan Buddhism more and more, and Westerners have come into the Tibetan societies and then done research on Buddhism and found that Tibetans have been using those who have used their intelligence, human intelligence, to the utmost are perhaps, I think, scientists. So if you follow certain tradition, and then you tend to take side of it, and for us Tibetans, when we talk about Buddhism, we tend to lean towards Buddhism as being something good, and so that is rather biased. But in Buddhism, we talk about being unbiased and intelligent, and someone who's interested in pursuing the path. So if you are not unbiased, then even if some teachings of the Buddhism, the Buddha himself, could be in terms of like the theory of selflessness, if you use your intelligence into examining this, there is reason. At some point, sometimes Buddha has taught the grosser form of selflessness, and the reason why Buddha has taught this is because at that point of time, for such a disciple, it was useful in order to lead them away from nihilism. So the gross form of selflessness is not the ultimate teaching of the Buddha. So even these teachings cannot be taken literally, even if they teach this rough idea of selflessness. So it is important for us to be unbiased. We have, even amongst the scientists, perhaps there are people who may be biased. For example, the Chinese communists. They talk about being scientific and all that, but what they really want is things which are according to their own ideology, so they are not completely open and do investigation. So scientists have to be unbiased without having any kind of attachment to their own subjects. So we're not talking about the morality. When scientists do their investigation, there's no talk about morality. In Buddhism also this is the case. When we do investigation, we don't think about whether something is something that we should adopt or discard, but the reality, we are trying to find the reality, and then the next step is that of going into the issue of morality. So in the last we came into exile in 1959, and in the 60s and 70s, and particularly in the 80s, we have come to contact with scientists, and scientists who are unbiased. A very famous scientist, well-known scientists, well-respected scientists, have taken interest in Tibetan Buddhism. This has not happened because we bribed them, or we have not requested to them by giving $1 billion rupees or dollars and asked them to take interest in Buddhism. We don't have that money, of course. Nor have these scientists taken interest in Tibetan Buddhism by force, like the Chinese do in Tibetans. So as we say, if you are worth, then people will value you. So this Buddhism that we have, Tibetan Buddhism, has come from Nalanda. The practice of Vinaya, monastic codes, or the practice of Abhidharma, the lower Abhidharma, are common to the Pali tradition as well. And then there is the upper Abhidharma, higher Abhidharma, and then Madhyamaka and Pramana, or logic and epistemology. Buddhism becomes broader. And Tibetan tradition is Sanskrit tradition, whereas Chinese also Chinese Buddhism is also Sanskrit tradition, but there's difference. They do not have the study of logic and epistemology, and they do not have the study of or epistemology and logic as founded by Chandarakshita and Kamalashil. And also they do not have the study of Prasanapada, the clear word of Chandrakirti, and they do not study this. And so since these studies and these texts did not exist in Chinese, they have not also gone to Japan, Korea, and Vietnam and so forth, because Buddhism in these countries came from China. So whereas in Tibetan Buddhism we have study and texts of all these different fields. And Buddhism was established in Tibet by Master Chandarakshita, who was himself a Madhyamaka scholar, and he was also a great scholar of Pramana, or logic and epistemology. Right from in the beginning of his text, the Madhyamaka Lankara, he starts by engaging in debate. Historically, we talk about Haishans coming into Tibet, and but mainly they focused on meditation, concentration, and also perhaps they also did meditation on certain techniques for taking rebirth in Sugawati lands. And so when there was danger in Tibet of such a system taking root in Tibet, then Kamalashila came and emphasized on investigation. Of course, Kamalashila may have rejected or objected to this no thoughts meditation, but he said that alone is not enough for practicing Buddhism, but we need to do investigation. And so since then, the tradition of considering or regarding the study of logic and epistemology as in Tibetan tradition, perhaps the system of debate itself in Tibet was as we do it today, may have started during the time of the Chavachuja Senke in the 11th century. So. But the basic structure of debate itself is found in the traditional texts that have been translated from India. So as Tibetans, we have to be confident and proud about, in order to have pride and confidence, it should come from, based on Tibetan Buddhism. It does not come from Tibetan bark or the eating raw meat and so forth. So these do not really make us proud. Tibetan medicine is something really good. So Tibetan Buddhism is complete Buddhism, and particularly demonstrating it and establishing it through the logic and epistemology is something that we have to be, we can be proud of. We can show off to the world. So such Buddhism that we have, Tibetan Buddhism, which is a complete teaching of the Buddha, which has the study of Madhyamaka and logic and epistemology, to explain this system, we have Tibetan. And there's nothing like Tibetan which can explain these. Of course, the Kanjur and Tanjur were originally in Sanskrit. So the major texts of the Madhyamaka and the logic epistemology were in Sanskrit, and then, but there's no real good explanation that can be given based on the Sanskrit text. So therefore, to study these Madhyamaka and epistemology and so forth, Tibetan language is something that we can be proud of. So if you think that studying Buddhism is something, an extra thing that you have to do, as if you have nothing else to do, but this, then it's wrong. So it is something very important for people. Madhyamaka and logic and epistemology, study of these. If you think that you are not Buddhist and you don't need to study them, that's also wrong. So there's the practice of love, compassion, and renunciation and so forth, which are practice of Buddhism, this religion. Whereas, as they debated earlier about the object of perception and the subjective mind that perceives it, so these come as part of our knowledge. So this is merely studying about these things. It's not a religious study as such. So this is important to know for you. So as I have been interacting with scientists over the years, many scientists use this. They use this phrase, Buddhism and dialogue between science and Buddhism. And they say that this is not quite right. To say Buddhism and science dialogue is not quite right. Because Buddhism means the religion, spirituality of Buddhism, they say. Whereas we are here discussing about, not discussing about the four kayas or past and future lives. But what we are studying, discussing about is the nature of mind. And therefore, there is the Buddhist science. Precisely what we are discussing is about the Buddhist mind, science. So which is one part of Buddhism, and the second part is that of Buddhist concept of philosophy. And the third part is Buddhist religion or spirituality, which is for disciplining our mind, technique for disciplining our mind. So we divide Buddhism into these three categories, out of which the presentation of Buddhist science is something we use to discuss, is the basis for us to have discussions with the scientists, and also some part of philosophy also comes in the discussion, but Buddhist spirituality does not come into the picture of the discussions with scientists. So today I wish to there are some of you dishes. So I had talked with Dr. Tibetan Jimbala and Gishi Doji Damdela, who is here today. To science, chemistry, and other sciences, the modern subjects that are taught in the schools today, using that as the basis. If we could use the logical procedures of the relationships between different things, whether they are mutually exclusive or mutually inclusive or contradictory, synonymous and so forth. I have suggested to include this kind of procedure of studying the different subjects by using these logical procedures that we study. So in India, I have come to notice that after Bodh Gaya teachings, I went to Orissa, the Tibetan settlement down there, and after that, being the settlement, I was in Bhubaneswar, the capital of Orissa state. So the tourism department and project department of our race government had told me that they have found lots of Buddhist ruins of Buddhist monasteries in that state, and they were taking lots of interest in Buddhism. And then after that I was in Gujarat. The state government itself is taking lots of interest in because they have found lots of remains of Buddhist relics, monasteries and so forth, and they also found a huge remain of excavated huge remain of a monastery, big monastery in Gujarat. And they also found some relics of Buddha, the stupa. And also in Bihar there's interest in, I was there just on the full moon day. They have built a temple there, this temple. And there's so much interest in India itself on Buddhism. So I've talked, after being in these places, I've talked with our Gaulin Tepa, Samdang Rinpoche. And I told that it's very good, when I went to these places, I said that it's very good that people are taking interest in So what is the difference between Buddhist science or science as it is taught in Buddhism? Is there a difference? Science as explained in Buddhism, as philosophy as explained in Buddhism, and Buddhist spirituality, perhaps we can say it like this. So in English I said that Buddhism can be divided into these three categories: Buddhist science, Buddhist philosophy, and Buddhist spirituality or religion. So Buddhist science and Buddhist philosophy are something universal, which comes in the period of academic studies. Whereas Buddhist religion is to do with Buddhists. So Buddhist science and Buddhist philosophy have nothing to do with, it's not only to do with Buddhism, practice of Buddhism as, per se, but you have to study them in your institutions, which you are going to study. So this is something academic and not about spirituality of Buddhism. So like I said, it's important to study these. Whereas if people are Buddhist, then you can teach Buddhist spirituality. So for someone who practices Buddhism, then Buddhist spirituality, they have to study Buddhist science and Buddhist philosophy, and then go into the practice of Buddhist spirituality. So I think that we have to make a difference here, that those who do study of Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist science do not, for them, these do not become a Buddhist spirituality as such. Although we have people who are experts in the Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist science, but we are stuck with the language, and therefore we have to study, we have to perhaps start an intensive program, workshop, where people could be trained in Buddhist science, Buddhist philosophy, and Buddhist spirituality, and making these three distinctions, teach them. As the people have debated here earlier, whether something exists or not is defined by whether that thing is perceived by some valid cognition or not. So this is something which can explain to anybody, scientist or anybody, that things have to be posited in accordance with the valid cognition. So these may come into the category of Buddhist science. And then and in the Abhidharma study texts, we talk about suffering and the truth suffering. There's talk about the external and internal things. In the external world, there are the formation of the universe from the different elements, the subtle particles building up, and also the 5 different elements are taught. So this maybe come into the category of Buddhist science of matter. So in both the higher and lower Abhidharma, there is also the explanation of the 5 aggregates, the 12 spheres, so which may be included in Buddhist science, external material science, science of matter, whereas with regard to the inner science of Buddhism, it is something which is unique to the Indian tradition, and particularly Buddhism. So there is the explanation of the mind. Within this explanation of mind, there is also in Tantra, which we can add to Abhidharma, in terms of the different distinction or differentiation between the subtle and gross states of mind. And then there is also in Tantra the explanation of subtle wind energy. So perhaps we can also include this in the Buddhist science. And then from the lower Abhidharma, perhaps we can take certain subjects like the formation of the universe and so forth. Of course, there are some things which may not be so relevant. So Namgyal Monastery abbot also, you should pay attention to this. Find in the different scriptures the reference to these Buddhist signs. So when you study the collected topics in the primer of Buddhist logic, we study about the positive and negative phenomena and so forth. Perhaps they also come in Buddhist science, philosophy. So within Buddhist science, there is the Buddhist science of matter and the science of mind. They can make these 2 subdivisions and make one curriculum for study. And then with regard to Buddhist philosophy, The presentations or topics such as the negative or positive phenomena and so forth may come into this category. In Buddhist logic, we talk about it is said that the words, language, and the conceptual mind engage in objects by eliminating or something from the objects by elimination. And then there is also the interdependence, causal interdependence, and the interdependence by way of designation. So within which how our mind kind of operates on the objects come into this category of, and also the causality comes into this, where we reject that the things do not come from the creator. So I'm not quite sure whether when it comes to the subjects like object of perception and so forth, whether it has to be included in Buddhist philosophy or Buddhist science. So there is the Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist science. Within Buddhist science, we can take things from the Buddhist Tantra. And in Buddhist philosophy, the causality, interdependence in terms of causality and interdependence in terms of designation, within which there are different presentations from the non-Buddhist traditions. So if you're on those who have debated today, they've debated about the two truths according to the Swatantrika philosophical school. You should not think that that is the only way of presenting the two truths in Buddhism. Whereas, because if you only if you think that that is the only way of explaining the two truths, then when you come to Madhyamaka, you may find it quite perplexing. Thinking, what have I studied earlier? And then there is the presentation of the different tenet systems. There are taught the philosophy of the Chittamatra and the Yogacara Savatantrika Madhyamaka. So the genre of text that we find in Tibetan called Tupta, the system of the philosophical systems, study of philosophical systems, goes from the Indian sources, such as Bhava Viveka and so forth. So if we could settle with some curriculum for some syllabus for study in the schools of Buddhist science and Buddhist philosophy, perhaps many scholars could gather together and make such curriculum. And then when it, with regard to the debate, this comes within the category of Buddhist philosophy, where direct perceptions are said to operate on objects directly, whereas the conceptual mind and language operate or engage with objects through elimination. And there are also the explanation of the different types of mind in our tenets. and logic and reasoning. Perhaps these could be separate subjects. But the objective is not only for Buddhists. Of course, Buddhists can study this, but even for non-Buddhists, who could at least then recognize that there is such a thing called Buddhist philosophy and logic, which is not so through these we can make a big contribution to the world at large. So if I explain like this to you, perhaps you students could also get some idea about such and such things there are in Buddhism. So I thought to share this. And then we have a question and answer session. So after being in America, I was a little bit unwell. I had fever. So today I'm a bit better. So I do not have anything special to say about Buddhism, but I'll just say, read this book. So first we'll have question and answer session. So did you get some idea about how rich our Tibetan culture is and how much we can contribute to the world? Have you got some idea about it? Is there some point in it? So I'm saying that you have to know that there is such a thing. So if I feel good, if my health doesn't deteriorate, or I'll come tomorrow also. But if I feel worse, then I will. As long as it's talking in Tsang dialect, then I'd say, excuse me from tomorrow's session. So you can ask any kind of question. So with regard to the Buddhist science and Buddhist philosophy, Sir Rinpoche has written a book, Tibetan master who lived in Denmark, and there is a program called Unity in Duality, which he had studied. So he's asking His Holiness' opinion. Tara Rinpoche has started this program called Unity in Duality. Whether it's good to include this in the subject for study in schools. So with regard to this interdependent nature of things, so the two Tibetan words Tenjung, Tendel are synonymous, and I think this comes under the category of Buddhist philosophy. So when it with regard to interdependence, the Buddha said that things have not come from without any causes, but nor have they come from any permanent, unchanging causes, nor are they created by some kind of a creator God. So perhaps it is more relevant to recognize the understanding of relativity in the Buddhist philosophy, to include it within Buddhist philosophy. So first of all, he prayed his own tulip long. Okay. So he was. This boy is referring to Tsongkhapa's text called "The Three Principal Aspects of That Path." It's quite a technical thing where it says. So the extreme view of eternalism is overcome through the perception of appearances, whereas the nihilism is overcome through that of emptiness. So in Gongdang Rinpoche, one of his writings, he says, with regard to appearance and emptiness, they sequentially overcome the nihilism and eternalism. This is something which all the Buddhist philosophical schools accept commonly, whereas the other way around, which is to say, the eternalism being overcome through appearance, and that of the nihilism being overcome through emptiness. Understanding of emptiness is something which is unique to the Prasangika Madhyamaka. So the other Buddhist philosophical schools say that if everything is merely imputed by mind, then even in they say that if things do not have exist from their side, then if it's only merely imputed, then you would think about anything and they should exist. Whereas that's not the case. Even amongst the Buddhist Madhyamaka philosophy, the philosophers such as Bhaviveka assert that things should exist from their side as well. For example, when it comes to finding the real self, a person, he points to the consciousness. So when Prasangikas say that the appearances actually reject that of eternalism. Although things appear to have some existence from their side, but the mere appearance itself shows that they do not have any essence in themselves. if they were to have some essence in themselves, then we have to be able to find it when we do investigation, analysis. For example, if you see a mirage and think that there is water there, if there is a real water there, then you should be able to find water when you actually go for search, in search of it, whereas you don't find it. So this shows that there is no, things do not, although things do appear to have some essence, that there is no such way of existence from their side. And therefore you find that it's like illusion. So although things do appear to have some self-existence from their side, that is merely because of our distorted perception. And therefore they do exist, but merely in name. Because when you become certain that gain certitude that they do not exist the way they appear, it shows that their existence is merely by way of imputation, but merely in name. So Kirub Norsang Gyatso has said that to an eye perception which sees two moons out of some visual defect in the eye, the person who knows that there are no two moons out there, but still, because of the problem in his eyes, he sees these two, and is able to ascertain to himself that there are no two moons, but only one. Although it does appear to me that the two moons do appear to me. So I'm not able to remember what Kiruna Sanjay just said. Someone has asked if anybody knows the first two lines or so. So Kiruna Sankhya basically is saying that when we say some things are empty, it doesn't mean that things do not function, do not have any function. They are absent of any functionality, but emptiness here means that they do not exist in and of themselves. Therefore, he says the appearance and emptiness are the two sides of the coin. One side is that of the undeceptive interdependence, and the other side is that of the emptiness of true existence. So emptiness has to be understood in that way. In the sense of being absent of any essence. To the mind which perceives emptiness, no other objects really come into the perception. As in the collective topics you study about the positive and negative phenomena, emptiness is a negative phenomena, which is more precisely called non-implicative negative. So when you think about this house, the perception that there's no elephant in this hall is a valid cognition. So when you say there's no elephant here, that perception takes the fact that fact of the absence of the elephants as its object. So that's the kind of non-implicative negative. So when you say there is no elephant, and you think there is no elephant here, but if you say there is no elephant, but, then that is also a negative phenomena, but it's implicative, negative phenomena. So if you think there's no elephant, but a cat is running here, then that kind of perception becomes like a perception of a negative phenomena called implicative negative phenomena. So when you are in your mind are totally sure, have this certitude that things do not have any intrinsic existence from their side, that perception does not take any other object as a perceived object, but that mere absence. So just thinking that there's nothing there when you think there's no self. So after that perception, subsequent to that, then you find that because they do not exist, things do not exist from their own side, they are their existence is merely by way of interdependence, that your imputation of this and that thing, through that the things exist. And that's the way you have to understand how the cognition of the appearance does away with their permanence. Whereas when you think emptiness, and empty doesn't here mean that nihilism, but emptiness here means that things do not have any existence from their own side, but they are dependent. And then you understand that emptiness, if you understand emptiness in the sense of dependence, then you are able to do away with the idea of nihilism. So the quotation that you are talking about refers to this. After having gained certitude and emptiness, so if you find emptiness through different logics, such as reasoning of dependence or the reasoning of the sevenfold reasoning and so forth, and suppose you have gained certitude and emptiness through these logics, but you are not able to, if you are not able to gain certitude in the interdependence of things, but think that things do not really exist at all, then you almost tend to fall into nihilism. Whereas if those who assert that things do not have any essence, they do not exist from their own side, of course they too do engage in the daily activities such as taking meals and so forth. Domtamba has said that your hand is and essentially empty, and the fire is essentially empty. Although they both are essentially empty, if you put your hand into the fire, you'll burn. So there's no. So if your understanding of emptiness is not able to complement the understanding of the dependent nature of things, and vice versa, and you are not able to, it is said by Lama Tsongkhapa that you have not yet understood the deepest intention of the Buddha. But because the working of the causality is right there before us, the effects are dependent on causes and conditions, and whereas if the effects were to exist truly from the its own side, then it does not need to depend on causes and conditions. So this is one way of talking about dependence. So except those philosophical schools like Lokayatas or those who assert things arising from permanent causes and conditions, or so the Buddhist interdependence is something which is a unique tenet of Buddhism. So long as you assert some kind of a creator out there, a permanent creator, unchanging creator, which creates all these things in the world, then you cannot understand interdependence fully. Whereas all the Buddhist philosophical schools assert their interdependence. And they say that effects arise from causes. Now those who assert that things are merely interdependent even assert that not only that the effects are dependent on causes, but the causes themselves are dependent on the effects. So because when you say something is a cause, you have to posit it in relation to something else, and therefore it is a cause in relation to the effect, and therefore the cause does not cannot exist independently. So when you see the cause and effects, the effects are interdependent, you understand that they do not exist independently. They have no such independent existence on their own. And then Tsongkhapa goes on to say the rest of the things, how the appearance displaces that of eternalism and so forth. So for these you have to really think over and over. So this your question was a good question. You when the boy asked the question, he said lump sum or 3 parts, whereas he should have said lump sum, which means, so when he first used this word 3 parts, I was thinking whether he was asking about the Shravaka, Pratyeka and Bodhisattva parts. So my question is, has to do with Vinaya, the monastic code of discipline. He's asking whether Bhikshuni lineage exists in the Tibetan tradition. So his question was basically, he said that the women in the Tibetan tradition, we don't have the Bhikshuni lineage, and for women lacking a certain kind of human rights. So according to Vinaya, we have to follow the rules laid down by the Buddha himself. We do not have the right to change the Vinaya. So George Atisha has said in the Vikramalashila monastery, when they have to decide about something, they have to, the monks came together and decided whether that thing the monastery has to do accords with the Vinaya, and particularly Bodhisattva scriptures. So, but Vinaya is very important. It is said that whether the Buddhist tradition of Buddhism remains or not is dependent on whether there is the practice of the Vinaya. So when the Buddha was alive, I'm not being sarcastic here, when Buddha was alive, just when the Buddha himself calls on somebody to come here, then immediately the person gets ordained. Whereas then later on he laid down the rules of monastic institutions that you have to have certain number of monks, the preceptor, master preceptor, and the activity master, and so forth, in order for people to get ordination. There are certain numbers of monks that have to be a required number of monks in the central lands, whereas in the remote places there are other numbers, less number of monks required. Whereas for the Bhikshuni ordination, I think it's the preceptor has to be a Bhikshuni, and then the activity master has to be a Bhikshu, and then there have to be other bhikshus who assist the ordination. And if the required number of the assistants is 10, then there have to be 5 bhikshunis and 5 bhikshus for the ordination. The Vinaya tradition that we have it comes from Master Nagarjuna, and the school is that we belong to is the Mula Sarvasti Vadan, whereas in China the Vinaya tradition is the lineage of Kashyapa, and then the school that they follow is that of Dharmagupta. So we have to do further investigation in terms of how they really ordain bhikshunis. I met a group from a Buddhist group from Singapore. The leader of the group was Lao. So the leader was from Sri Lanka, and then there were two ladies who said they were the two ladies who were wearing their robes like the Christian nuns, actually, whether gray robes with headgear. So I told them that in Buddhist nuns and monks and nuns should not wear So I told them that Buddhist monks and nuns are not allowed to wear black and other colors which are supposed to be colors of lay people. So this monk supposedly apparently this monk ordained these nuns. So when I saw these nuns, I thought things are not quite right, kind of. Of course, it's not our business. But according to the Vinaya, that is quite strange, that they said they were Buddhist bhikshunis, whereas they were wearing some robes with sleeves, and the color was grayish, bluish sort of thing, and so we have to still check whether this the way they ordain bhikshunis in the Chinese lineage. And I met also a Vietnamese monk and so we have to really do some further investigation into the procedure of ordination that is followed in China. So the Vinaya tradition that we Tibetans follow is that the Vinaya scripture was translated into Tibetan from Sanskrit, whereas the Theravada tradition, they have their text originally in Pali. So according to the Pali tradition of Vinaya, they have about 220 or 27 vows, whereas in the Mulasarvastivada tradition we have 253 vows for monks. So the number of vows that they keep slightly differ from us, where so there are certain difference in the number of different vows that we Theravada monks keep. It seems whereas there's one set of vows which in the Mulasarvastivada the number is 90, whereas in the Pali it's 92. But what I clearly remember is that in the Pali Sutra, it's mentioned that with regard to the lower robe that the monks wear, it has to be worn in a roundish manner. Whereas so that's the only one mentioned about the manner of wearing the lower robes. Whereas in Tibetan Pratimoksha Sutra, there's mention of 7 different ways in which the lower robe has to be worn, such as not too long like an elephant's tusk, or it's not hanging too low like an elephant tusk, and so forth. And not too tight. Of course, there are sometimes in the Vinaya text there are exceptions given. So, with regard to this, according to that exceptions, then some Vinaya masters say that perhaps we could have a bhikshu leading the ordination as the preceptor of the ordination. But others say this is not possible in our tradition. So it has been quite a long time since we have been investigating into this. And we had 3 or 4 conferences. One time it was held in a conference about Bhikshuni ordination was held in Novolenka here in Sidbury. One Chinese abbot also came at that time. So with regard to Vinaya, when it comes to the Vinaya vows and ordination and all these, we have to follow the rules laid down by the Buddha, as we find in the... So from the point of view of human rights, it may be true that we are not giving equal right to the women, Tibetan women, by not having Bhikshuni ordination. But when it comes to studying Dharma, philosophy, we started here in Dharamsala in Gadinchaling Nunnery. So at that time, during the inaugural ceremony for studying the Buddhism, Buddhist philosophy, it's been perhaps 40 years. At the time I went to the nunnery, and then I gave a teaching on Abhisamaya Alankara in the nunnery. And then I also have suggested to have geshe, female geshes. And some of the geshes objected to that. That's not possible. And then I said, Buddha himself has ordained bhikshus and bhikshunis both. And therefore, he has given equal rights to the men and women. So why not geshe mahas? So we are trying to find out how we can decide about the geshe ma degree for the nuns. There are many the nuns have really studied well. So let me have... So when we study Buddhist philosophy in our schools, and in philosophy it says that we have there's no beginning to the samsara, whereas there's an end to each sentient beings. But the number of sentient beings is it's numberless. Sentient beings are numberless. So I don't know how to translate that, but it's none of your business sort of thing, His Holiness says. So how come all if the number of sentient beings is numberless, then how is it possible? the question was that. So in general, we can say there is no so of course if you take each and every sentient being, then each and every sentient being can ultimately become a Buddha. Therefore, from that point of view, it is said that there is an end to samsara. Whereas if you take the sentient beings as a whole, then perhaps because it's numberless or infinite, therefore there's no end. So that doesn't really make... So that's why His Holiness said that it's something that he is poking into the people's business kind of thing. So the next question. I'm sorry, I can't hear him. It's very strong Amdo accent. In the past there was a Geshe. It's not good to mention his name. He knew English quite well. And he gave a talk in at Tibetan library. And the Tibetans who listened to him thought that he was speaking Tibetan in English, whereas Tibetan, whereas the Westerners who were there thought he was speaking in Tibetan or something like that. So nobody really understood him. So now Geshe Losang Dawala is trying to read the question. So our Tibetan language and its usage is a standard language in the world, international language, whereas it's not being used properly in our society, in exile. And the Tibetan youth are not taking much interest in learning Tibetan language. Whereas back in Tibet, there are people who have set up organizations to preserve and promote our language. And His Holiness has given many lectures where he has emphasized on preserving the language. But this does not seem to be proving effective in the exile community. So what is your opinion? So that's true, His Holiness said. I think it was during the first general body meeting of the Tibetan teachers in different schools, convened by the Tibetan Department of Education. We heard the suggestion that the different subjects that are taught in the schools should be slowly translated into Tibetan, and then the Tibetan children should be taught in Tibetan. And at that time there was a couple from a Polish couple. We used to call him Poland, Bola, old man from Poland. He suggested that the teachers should translate the subjects they are teaching into Tibetan. Before they go to class the next day, they have to translate whatever they're going to teach the next day into Tibetan and then go to class. In the 1950s, when I was in China, I visited in the coastal region of China. There is a Dongpen area called Dongpen, where Koreans used to live. So during that visit, the university there was teaching the different subjects in their language. Korean, yeah. And so at that conference, we had the suggestion that the different subjects should be taught in Tibetan. And now in TCV school, schools have started teaching the different subjects from the kindergarten up to class 5 to teach everything in Tibetan. And therefore the students don't have to struggle with the language. Whereas if they have to be taught in English, then it proves a little bit difficult because of the language. So there is an understanding that it's better to teach the Tibetan kids in Tibetan. So we have another school, the model school, I think he's always talking about, where this, different things, subjects are taught in Tibetan only. Of course, there is some problem here because when students graduate from their schools and go into higher studies in college and universities, most of them had to study through the medium of English. So in the last 50 years of our exile, the beginning, of course, we were not even clear about where we were going, about our direction, and then after 20 years of being in exile, we tried to make some improvement in terms of teaching the different subjects. There's been some lags somewhere. So we have to find out the causes for this. Try to make sure that these do not happen in the future. So last year we had a conference of the schools. And everybody was expressing their views. Even back in Tibet, it seems that in certain regions, it seems the people are really working hard on teaching different subjects in Tibetan, and Tibetan is being really promoted. Whereas in the Tibet Autonomous Region, it seems that there is restriction from the Chinese government to teach in Tibetan. I met someone from the Lhasa Tibet University. He said that when after Ten Kunyan came to Tibet, teaching the different subjects in Tibetan language was stopped. Before that, they used to teach in Tibetan the different texts, like Nagarjuna's letter to a friend and so forth. But after that, Ten Kunyan's visit to Tibet, everything was changed. That people had to translate everything into Chinese and then teach it. And then I don't know if it's true, but last year I heard that last year from the Tibet Autonomous Region, there was a letter was written to the central government of China. That Chinese is being used as the primary language to teach, and not Tibetan. And the monasteries are just turned into like a tourist attraction, and there should not be a study of Buddhism in these big monasteries. So there has been such a letter written to the central government. But perhaps some parents think that if their kids do not don't learn Chinese, then they cannot get high marks in the exams. Whereas those who are good in Tibetan, during the exams, they get really low marks. Whereas those who know Chinese get higher marks, and they get the better opportunity to study, to pursue higher studies in China. Whereas those who are good in Tibetan do not have that opportunity, and therefore the parents think about the employment for their kids, and they also put effort in educating their children in Chinese. So we are under the power of others. So we have no freedom. They do not have freedom in Tibet. So that's the situation. Whereas we in exile have freedom. So as I said earlier, the cream of the culture of Tibetan culture has to be shown through that of Buddhism, for which we have to use our language. And if we have more and more students in the schools who have a very high standard of Tibetan, like the different Dharma terminology, and then when they become parents, their kids will have better Tibetan. Whereas the present situation is such that the majority of common people do not have any idea about the Buddhist terminology. They're very high. So this language that we have, if we can feel proud of its potentiality for contributing to the world at large, and also to our own culture, then we would be able to really help through many Tibetan students who may go into these higher institutions, universities and so forth. Of course, there has been some lags, and I cannot say anything, but we're sorry about it. The differentiation between Buddhist and non-Buddhist is made on the basis of taking refuge. If we prostrate or pay homage to the non-Buddhist deities or gods, do we lose the precept of taking refuge? Perhaps there is a difference in how you pay homage. So I usually say that all the religions in the world have to be harmonious. This is a sincere urge, not just out of polity. So when you say you have to respect all religions, you have to make distinction between respect and faith. So to your own tradition, religion, you have faith in it, whereas to the other religious faiths, you can have respect to them. There is a distinction between these two, respect and faith. So faith has to do with one's own religion, whereas respect to other traditions as well. So we say we respect our parents, and we have faith in our gurus. So for the past thousands of years, the different religions have been really helpful to their followers, and therefore you have to acknowledge that and respect them. Whereas to your own tradition, you have faith. You should have faith in the Buddha, the founder of Buddhism. So understanding that the Buddha is the one who has overcome all his faults, shortcomings, and you can prostrate to the Buddha. Whereas in my case, I pay respect to Jesus Christ. I do not make prostration as such, but I pay respect because I acknowledge that teaching of Jesus Christ himself has really helped many people, and it shows the path of morality and so forth. Of course, there are people who may misbehave, even as Christians, and so you can fold your hands like this if there's nothing wrong with it. You can prostrate, but to other religious traditions, you can acknowledge the fact that they have been really helpful to humanity immensely, and therefore pay respect. So you have to be sure about the difference between Buddhism and non-Buddhist traditions. So it's questionable whether you really take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha by just saying, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Because in the past, in Tibet, there used to be Muslims, Tibetan Muslims, who would swear by the three jewels. So that doesn't mean they have faith in the three jewels. So there's a saying that the difference between Buddhism and non-Buddhist traditions is made on the basis of taking refuge, and also on the basis of the philosophical views. The second case is particularly said by Jamyang Shepa in his big text on tenets. So you have to be able to generate faith in the Buddha by understanding the Dharma, which basically means understanding the possibility of the true cessation, finding that it is something possible that you can actually experience. And then once you attain this true cessation within yourself, or when someone attains it, that person becomes a sangha jewel. So His Holiness has written this prayer called the Supplication to the 17 Masters of Nalanda, wherein he says, may I find find the principle of taking refuge through understanding and awareness, through valid cognition, by understanding the four truths, which in turn should be based on the understanding of the true truths. So here you have to understand how the ignorance can be overcome. So ignorance, you have to here understand that what ignorance actually grasps at. This ignorance which perceives true existence of things, what it actually perceives. Here, when we talk about the true truths, it's not the true truths as it is understood by you. His Holiness is pointing to the people who presented the debate earlier, because they were doing according to Sautrantika philosophy. So when you understand that things do not have any true essential existence in and of themselves, then you'll find that the true existence is not actually there. Therefore, the ignorance which actually perceives such a way of existence as a wrong perception. And therefore, you'll find that the understanding of emptiness or selflessness can go against this ignorance and thereby attain the true cessation. And this cessation comes through the true path. Of course, suffering is something that we all know that is there. Nobody needs to be introduced to it, but then when it comes to the origin of suffering, the sufferings come from our distorted minds and karma, and all these delusions are finally rooted in there of ignorance. And that way you find that ignorance is something that you can overcome, and therefore you find the possibility of cessation through that of the true path. And therefore you can, when you understand this, you will find faith and in respect in the Buddha who showed this path, and those who have actually experienced the true path and true cessation. And this way you take refuge in the three jewels of Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. No. So he said, the question was that in the text it said that the seed has to be necessarily an abstract phenomena called Denmin-duje, which we translated as non-compositional, non-associated compositional factor or something like that. But all seeds are not necessarily that kind of phenomena, because the seed of sprout is not at all Denmin-duje. Whereas whereas if you are talking about the imprints left on the mind, then perhaps that is Denmen-Doje, an abstract. So for that you have to go into it's quite complicated when you talk about this seed or the imprint. According to Chittamatra, there is the mind that leaves this imprint, and the imprinted seed, and on which the consciousness on which it is left, and so forth. So with regard to the second part of the question, you cannot posit something changing or disintegrating without understanding impermanence. The fact that things change is because of changing momentarily. As soon as the thing comes into existence, it's bound to change, and that change is not brought about of a third factor, but the thing itself is in that nature of change. So the first moment gives rise to the second moment, and so forth. And then with regard to causes, we have the substantial cause, and then the contributing factors in the external world, as well as in internal world of our body. We have the substantial causes and its contributing factors, and also the mind has these. The substantial cause is something which actually turns into the effect. So the mind is something immaterial. It is mere clarity and luminosity, and therefore something which has that nature can be produced by the cause which has those qualities. So that is where Dharmakirti is saying a non-mind, and something which is not a mind cannot give rise to a mind as a substantial factor. So the lines in Lama-Tsongkhapa's three principal aspects of the path, where it talks about the incontrovertibility of the cause and effect, and the suffering of samsara. Perhaps the terms cause and karma here can be, we can switch this word into gyunde milu, or incontrovertible cause and effect. So instead of lende milu, which for which you have to first understand that of the deceptive nature of cause and effect. So lende milu here can be translated as lende in the sense of karma, whereas gyunde milu is causality. So in order to come to the conclusion that things have arisen from karma, we have to understand the working of causality. And this is something which is natural, not made by Buddha or anything like that. So the fact that the working of causality is something deceiving is nature. Just like emptiness, as it said in the text, that emptiness is not created by the Buddha, but it is the nature of things. So there's a natural process of how causes and conditions give rise to their effects, and then when you relate that cause and effect to the experience of pleasure and pain, then you can talk about the working of karma, which arise or come about through certain motivation. So pleasure and pain comes from our karma, whereas the experience of it, the experiencing mind, comes naturally, not because of karma as such. So we have to first think about the unfailing nature of cause and effect, and then go into the understanding of karma, which in turn takes in the beginninglessness and endlessness of samsara and so forth. So on the basis of understanding the unfailing nature of karma, you understand the pleasure and pain arising. And then there is the talk of the existential suffering. So without understanding karma, there's no way you can understand past and future lives. I'm going to check whether I can come tomorrow or not. If I feel well, then I will come. If I don't feel well tomorrow, I will take rest. Would you permit me to take rest? Although I'm not here, the rest of you Geshes, we can continue this.